Hello children, hope you must have studied the previous two biology session of chapter 6, how do organisms reproduce. So today let us continue the chapter. Today we are going to study the sexual reproduction in flowering plants. So let us study the reproductive parts of a flower. So in flower there are four main floral parts are there. That is green colored portion, you call that as sepal, and the colored portion you call that as petals, and the male part you call that as androecium, and the female portion you call that as gynoecium. Okay, stamen, that is the male part, that only I told you, androecium. And gynoecium, that is the ovary and the associated structure, you call that as gynoecium. Otherwise it can be known as pistil also. Stamen and pistil are the reproductive parts of the flower. Stamen is the male reproductive part. It produces pollen grains. It contains anther, and the anther it produces the male gamete or pollen grains. Pistil is the female reproductive part. It produces ovules, which contain the female germ cells or female gamete. The pistil, when you see, it can ovary, style, stigma. Together you call that as pistil. Ovary, this portion, then style, then stigma. Stamen, it consists of anther and filament. Anther and filament. Together you call that as stamen. Now let us see regarding pollination. Pollination means transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of flower. You call that as pollination. The pollen grains are transferred from anther to stigma. It can be self-pollination or cross-pollination. In self-pollination, the pollen grain of the same flower, it falls upon the stigma of the same flower. That you call that as self-pollination. In cross-pollination, insects and some agents are helpful for this purpose. They transfer the pollen grains from one flower to other flower. Pollination, the cross-pollination, it can occur by means of insects, wind, water, etc. There are two types of pollination. One is self-pollination, other is cross-pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to a stigma of a flower. Later, fertilization. After pollen grains are transferred to the stigma, okay, you can see the pollen grains are there. After its transfer, it produces the pollen tube. It passes through the style and it enters the ovule. Okay, so here you can see the pollen tube and later it enters here. This is the same diagram. Here pollen grain, it starts to grow and it elongates into pollen tube and it reaches up to the ovule. Okay, so here that you call that as fertilization. So here in the ovule, the male germ cell, the male gamete, it forms two nuclei. One, it fuses with the, can you see in the diagram? I will show you. Two germ cells, you can see, two are there. Here one, it fuses with the egg and it forms the zygote, and other it fuses with the polar nuclei. Okay, one, it syngamy, it forms the zygote, and by means of triple fusion, already two cells are there, and here the third cell also fuses and the triple fusion. So together syngamy and triple fusion, you call that as double fertilization in plants. Okay, the plants, the type of fertilization, you call that as double fertilization. Here you don't study that much detail in 10th, but anyhow little bit you can study sometime extra also. So here the process, the fertilization means what? The ovule, that is the ovule, along with that in the ovule the male germ cell it fuses. Male gamete and the female gamete, when it fuses, that you call that as zygote, and this process you call that as fertilization. After fertilization, the zygote divides many times and it forms embryo and later develops into seed, and the ovary develops into fruit. So, this also we studied how the pollen tube forms and enters inside and it fuses. So, one it fuses with the central cell and one it fuses here, and the fertilization ultimately first pollination, then second fertilization. Pollination is transfer of pollen grain to stigma. So, here male gamete and female gamete it fuses, that you call that as fertilization. Okay children.